The sound of my dress ripping was louder than the music. Hundreds of wealthy guests turned toward me. I stood frozen beside a champagne table, holding the torn fabric against my chest. Across from me, Victoria smiled. She was the CEO's girlfriend, and she had just ripped my uniform in front of everyone. "Know your place," she whispered. She thought I was just a waitress. She thought I had no one powerful enough to defend me. She was wrong, but I didn't tell her who I really was. Not yet. I had been working at the charity gala for less than an hour when Victoria first noticed me. I was carrying a tray of sparkling water. She stopped me. "Where is the champagne?" "I'll get it right away." She rolled her eyes. "People like you should learn to move faster." I apologized and walked away. I didn't argue. That was important, because my husband had asked me to keep my identity private that evening. He was one of the main donors behind the charity, and he wanted to watch how the guests treated the staff when they thought nobody important was watching. So I kept my head down until Victoria came back. She grabbed my sleeve. "You spilled something on me." I looked at her dress. There wasn't a single drop on it. "I'm sorry, but..." She pulled harder, the fabric tore. The room went silent. Victoria looked at the torn uniform, then laughed. "Now everyone can see what you really are?" I felt humiliated, but I also noticed something behind her. My husband's security chief had stopped moving. He was staring directly at me, and slowly. He reached for his phone. I knew that look. My husband had one rule whenever we attended public events. If his security team called him during a function, something serious had happened. I shook my head at the security chief. "Don't call him. Not yet." I wanted Victoria to reveal who she really was. She pointed at my torn uniform. "Get her out of here." The event manager hurried over. "Miss, are you okay?" Victoria interrupted him. "She embarrassed me in front of my friends." "That isn't what happened," I said quietly. Victoria stepped closer. "You're a waitress. I'm the CEO's future wife." Several guests looked away. Nobody wanted to challenge her. Then an elderly woman near the stage spoke. "Enough!" Everyone turned. She was Margaret Hale, the founder of the charity. She had been watching everything. "Victoria," Margaret said, "did you tear that woman's dress?" Victoria immediately changed her expression. "It was an accident." Margaret looked at me. "Is that true?" I shook my head. "No." The room became uncomfortable. Victoria's face hardened. "You're lying." Before I could answer, the security chief approached Margaret. He whispered something in her ear. Margaret's eyes widened. She looked at me, then at the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said into the microphone, "we need to pause the program." Victoria laughed. "What now?" Margaret didn't answer her. Instead, she looked toward the entrance. The doors opened. My husband walked in. He wasn't wearing his usual tuxedo. He was wearing the simple black suit he'd chosen that morning. He stopped beside me, looked at my torn dress, then looked at Victoria. His voice was calm. "Who did this to my wife?" Victoria's smile disappeared. Nobody spoke. Victoria stared at my husband, then she laughed nervously. "Your wife?" My husband didn't move. "Yes." Victoria looked at me. "You're married to him?" I nodded. Her face went pale. The man beside her, Daniel, suddenly stepped forward. He was the CEO of the company sponsoring the gala. "Wait, you mean she's..." and my husband interrupted. "Don't..." One word. Daniel stopped. My husband gently placed his jacket around my shoulders. Then he turned toward the room. "This gala is supposed to raise money for women who have been treated as if they were invisible." He looked at my torn uniform. "And tonight, one of those women was treated exactly that way." Victoria immediately apologized. "I didn't know she was your wife." My husband looked at her. "That isn't the point." The room went completely silent. He continued, "You should not need to know someone's net worth before deciding whether they deserve respect." That sentence hit Victoria harder than any insult could have, but I wasn't finished. I stepped forward. "There is something else." My husband looked at me. I nodded. He knew what I meant. I turned toward Margaret. "Before tonight, I asked you not to reveal my identity." Margaret smiled. "I remember." I looked around the room. I wasn't here pretending to be a waitress. I was here because I wanted to see how people treated the people who served them. Then I looked directly at Victoria. And now I know. She stared at me. What does that mean? I took a breath. It means tomorrow morning, the charity board will review the footage. Victoria's expression changed, because she suddenly remembered there were cameras everywhere. And the gala wasn't the only thing being recorded. Her private conversation with Daniel had been recorded too. The next morning, the charity board met privately. I sat at the end of the table. My husband sat beside me. Victoria and Daniel sat across from us. Neither looked comfortable. Margaret placed a tablet on the table. We reviewed the footage from last night. Victoria immediately said, I already apologized. Margaret shook her head. This isn't about the dress anymore. She pressed play. The video showed Victoria grabbing my sleeve. Then came her words, people like you should learn to move faster. Victoria looked away, but the next recording was worse. It was audio from a private hallway. Victoria was talking to Daniel. She had been complaining about the charity. She said the event was a waste of money. Then she said something that changed the entire room. I don't care about these poor women, I just want the publicity. Daniel closed his eyes. Margaret stopped the recording. You also promised to redirect part of the charity sponsorship toward your own foundation. Daniel looked at Victoria. You told me that was approved. Victoria shook her head. You knew about it. My husband finally spoke. No, she didn't. Daniel looked terrified, because he had just realized something. The sponsorship agreement was legally under his company, and the money had already been transferred. Margaret slid a folder across the table. We discovered the transfer last night. Victoria stared at it. This is ridiculous. I opened the folder. Inside were bank records, emails, and signed documents. I looked at Victoria. You weren't just rude to me. You were stealing from the women this charity was created to help. Her face changed. For the first time, she had nothing to say. Daniel stood up. This isn't what happened. Margaret looked at him. Then explain the transfer. He couldn't. My husband leaned toward me. You okay? I nodded. I was angry, but I wasn't shaking anymore. Victoria suddenly pointed at me. This is all because of her. Everyone looked at her. She set me up. I almost laughed. I didn't ask you to tear my dress. You knew who you were. Yes, and you let me embarrass myself. No, I said quietly. You embarrassed yourself. Victoria went silent. Then Daniel's attorney entered the room. He placed another folder on the table. The company has completed its internal review. Daniel looked at him. What review? The one started after the charity's financial department reported irregular transfers. Daniel's face went pale. I looked at my husband. He had known there were financial concerns, but he hadn't known how deep they went. The attorney continued. Several sponsorship payments were moved through a consulting company. Margaret asked, who owns it? He opened the file. Victoria's brother. Victoria immediately stood. That doesn't prove anything. The attorney pointed to the signature page. It does when the authorization was signed using your credentials. Silence. Victoria looked at Daniel. Say something? Daniel didn't. He couldn't, because he had just realized the woman he planned to marry had been using his company to move charity money. And the woman she had humiliated was sitting beside the man who had funded the investigation. But I still hadn't told them the most important thing. I reached into my bag and placed one final document on the table. Victoria stared at it. Her expression changed instantly, because it was a contract with her name on it. Victoria stared at the contract. What is that? I turned it toward her. Your consulting agreement? She shook her head. I never signed that. You did. No, I pointed to the final page. Your signature is there. She looked at Daniel. He looked confused. Then the attorney spoke. This agreement transferred 5% of the gala sponsorship into the consulting company. Victoria's brother owned that company. Victoria's face went completely still. I knew she had expected everyone to focus on the torn dress. She never imagined we'd follow the money. That was her mistake. My husband looked at me. You found this before the gala? No, I smiled slightly. I found it after she tore my dress. The truth was simple. While everyone was arguing downstairs, I had asked Margaret to check the charity records. The suspicious transfer had already been flagged. The torn dress had nothing to do with the investigation, but it had given us a reason to look closer. And now everything connected. Victoria tried one last defense. You can't prove I knew about the transfers. Margaret opened another file. Oh, we can. She pulled out an email. It had been sent from Victoria's personal account. The subject line read, "Move the money before the audit." Victoria stopped breathing. Daniel read it twice. Then he looked at her. You lied to me. Victoria whispered, I was trying to protect us. Daniel shook his head. No, he looked at the documents. You were protecting yourself. The room fell silent. I stood up. I don't want revenge. Victoria looked at me. Then what do you want? I picked up my torn uniform. I want every dollar returned. And I want the women this charity helps to receive what was promised to them. My husband stood beside me, and that's exactly what will happen. For the first time that night, Victoria understood. The woman she thought was powerless had never needed to fight her. She only needed the truth to catch up with her. The investigation lasted 6 weeks. During that time, I stayed quiet. I didn't post anything online. I didn't give interviews. And I didn't tell anyone what I knew. The charity's lawyers worked with the company's investigators. They traced every suspicious payment. The total was much larger than we expected. Nearly $2.4 million had been moved through Victoria's brother's company. Some of it had already been spent. Some was still sitting in accounts. And then something unexpected happened. Victoria asked to meet me alone. I almost refused, but I agreed. We met at a small cafe far from the city center. She arrived without makeup. No designer dress. No expensive jewelry. Just a tired woman who looked completely different from the person I'd seen at the gala. She sat across from me. I owe you an apology. I said nothing. She looked down. I thought you were beneath me. I answered honestly. You treated me that way. She nodded. I did. Then she surprised me. I was jealous of you. I frowned. Why? Because Daniel respected you. I hadn't known that. She explained that Daniel had once asked me for advice about expanding his company's charity program. I had given him one suggestion: let the people receiving help have a voice in how the money was spent. He had listened. Victoria had hated that. She wanted control. She wanted recognition. And she thought the charity belonged to people like her. Then she started crying. I know what I did was wrong. I believed her, but forgiveness didn't mean there would be no consequences. I stood up. You don't have to earn my forgiveness. She looked at me. But you do have to take responsibility. She nodded. That was the last time I ever spoke to her privately. Because the next morning the police arrived at her brother's office. And Victoria finally realized this was no longer a family scandal. The case became public. News outlets reported the missing charity funds. Victoria's brother was arrested for fraud. Daniel resigned from the charity board. Victoria was removed from every leadership position connected to the foundation. But something else happened, something I hadn't expected. People began attacking me online. They said I had humiliated Victoria on purpose. They claimed the gala incident was staged. Some even said I should have exposed her immediately. I understood why they thought that. They hadn't seen what I had seen. They didn't know I had spent years learning one simple lesson: never confuse silence with weakness. So I gave one interview, just one. I sat in front of the cameras and told the truth. I wasn't pretending to be a waitress. I was volunteering. And when someone treats a person badly because they believe that person has less money or power, that tells you more about them than it does about the person they're insulting. The interviewer asked me about revenge. I smiled. I didn't destroy Victoria's life. She made choices. I simply stopped those choices from being hidden. The interview went viral. The part that mattered most wasn't the views. It was what happened afterward. Hundreds of former charity volunteers came forward. They shared stories of being treated badly by wealthy donors. The foundation created a new staff protection policy. Every worker received a direct complaint channel. No executive could interfere with an investigation. and the charity recovered almost all of the missing money. My husband and I personally matched the remaining amount. A year later, we returned to the same gala. This time, I wasn't wearing a waitress uniform. I was standing on the stage. Margaret handed me the microphone. I looked around the room, then I saw something that made me smile. A young waitress was standing near the entrance. Nervous, unsure, I walked over to her, and I handed her my microphone. "Your turn." She looked shocked, then she smiled, and as the room applauded, I realized something. The best revenge wasn't watching Victoria fall, it was making sure someone else never had to feel as small as I once did. 2 years passed. The charity grew. The new staff protection program became one of its most successful initiatives, and I kept volunteering. Not because I needed recognition, but because I remembered how that torn dress had made me feel. Small, embarrassed, invisible. One evening, Margaret called me into her office. She handed me a letter. I recognized the name immediately. Victoria. I opened it. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She wasn't asking me to help her. She simply wrote that she had started volunteering at a community center. She said she finally understood something: respect isn't something you give to powerful people. It's something you give to everyone. I folded the letter. I didn't need to know whether she had truly changed. That was her responsibility. Mine was different. I had to decide what kind of person I wanted to be after everything that happened. So I forgave her. Not because what she did was acceptable. It wasn't. I forgave her because I didn't want her cruelty living inside me forever. My husband came home that night and found me sitting on the balcony. He asked what I was thinking about. I told him about the letter. He smiled. "You know what I loved most about that night?" I laughed. "My torn dress?" "No," he looked at me. "You could have revealed who you were immediately. But you didn't. You gave people a chance to show you who they really were." I looked toward the city lights, and I finally understood the strange gift hidden inside that humiliating night. Victoria thought she had exposed me. Instead, she exposed herself. She thought I was powerless because I looked like a waitress. She never understood that dignity doesn't come from a designer dress or a billionaire husband or a bank account. It comes from knowing who you are when nobody thinks you're important. And that night, when my dress ripped in front of hundreds of people, I thought I had lost my dignity. But I hadn't. I had simply discovered who deserved to stand beside me.